In our headlines on this Tuesday afternoon, June 4th, here in South Korea. The official multilateral meeting between Korea and 48 African nations is underway, with a general session on shared growth, sustainability and solidarity that began earlier this morning at a convention center located in Gyeonggi-do province. And the cabinet here passes a proposal by the Presidential National Security Council calling for the suspension of the September 19th inter-Korean military agreement amid North Korea's floating of waste-carrying balloons into South Korea. Meanwhile, contrary to widespread expectations, Korea's inflation slows to a 10-month low in May on year to stand at 2.7%. And pundits say consumer prices will stabilize in the lower to mid 2% range in the latter half of this year. The Korea-Africa Summit is underway here in the country, and for details thus far, I have our Presidential Office correspondent Kim Do-yeon standing by live at the venue of this inaugural gathering. Do-yeon, welcome. Let's begin then with President Yoon Suk-yeol's opening address.
Sunny, good afternoon. As you said, the summit has kicked off, and after wrapping up the morning session, the leaders should be finishing up lunch as well. Earlier, President Yoon, sitting in front of the 48 participating nations' representatives, opened the first session, calling the summit a historic one and emphasizing the solidarity to tackle global crises. He also pointed out long-standing relations between South Korea and African nations during tough times. Take a listen.
1950년 6.25 전쟁이 발발하자 아프리카는 파병과 물자 지원을 통해 대한민국의 자유민주주의 수호에 기여해 주었습니다. 1950년대부터 70년대까지 많은 아프리카 국가들이 차례로 독립을 이룩하면서 우리와의 수교는 더 활발히 이루어졌습니다.
He proposed three directions to the participants under the summit's theme of the future we make together. Firstly, shared growth, in which Yoon noted the need to establish an institutional foundation for smooth exchange and cooperation, such as for trade agreements. Secondly, sustainability, which is tackling climate change through a combination of South Korean technology and Africa's young and dynamic population, as well as natural resources. Lastly, he spoke on solidarity, which he emphasized for maintaining peace. He mentioned recent actions by North Korea, calling out provocations including the balloons that carried trash into the south, and asked for support from African nations.
우리 대한민국은 아프리카의 친구 여러분들과 함께 힘을 모아 UN 안보리 결의안을 철저히 이행하면서 한반도와 국제사회의 평화를 지켜나가겠습니다.
Right, indeed, a presidential pledge for peace here and elsewhere. Do-yeon, what was the response from his African partners?
Overall, African leaders showed hope for enhanced cooperation. Take a listen to what the chair of the African Union and the president of Mauritania, Mohamed Ould Cheikh El Ghazouani, had to say.
I believe that the very reason African nations are attending this summit is because African countries are expressing their steadfast trust and gratitude towards South Korea.
Other leaders, such as the president of Rwanda, Paul Kagame, also added that this summit should have happened sooner, saying South Korea is a global pivotal state and Africa is a global pivotal continent. Others said there is a lot to learn from South Korea's success. We will hear more about the result of the discussion during the joint press conference.
Right, indeed, Do-yeon. And now, before you leave us, I understand the summit has a very busy agenda ahead. Do tell us a bit about the events to follow, Do-yeon.
That's right. Now, we've been reporting this over and over, but this is the biggest multilateral summit that President Yoon has hosted so far in South Korea, with 48 countries attending and representatives from organizations that represent Africa. Now, arrival and welcomes alone took more than an hour. Even for the media, the security at the venue is very tight, and you can see that reporters from all over the world are here to cover the summit. Now, as I mentioned earlier, we're waiting for the joint press conference to be held later in the afternoon, which will allow us to learn more. Meanwhile, amid all this, President Yoon will also be seeing each leader for short one-on-ones, as is customary for the host nation. Back to you, Sunny.
All right, Turn, thank you for that coverage of the Korea-Africa Summit taking place as we speak in the Greater Seoul region. Up next, our business correspondent Moon Hae-ryun explores the economic prospects of greater ties between Korea and its African counterparts. Do take a listen.
Africa is an extremely diverse continent with a wide range of low, middle and high-income economies. The World Bank dubs Sub-Saharan Africa the world's largest free trade area, with a 1.2 billion person market, as well as being rich in natural resources. This is what makes the continent an attractive partner for economic cooperation, as the issue of secure supply chains for raw materials becomes more and more important in South Korea. During the 4th Korea-Africa Forum back in 2016, both sides agreed to enhance their economic cooperation, as well as collaboration in other sectors such as science and technology, human resources, and fostering the younger generation. But over the past 10 years, progress has been somewhat stunted.
It only accounts for about 1 to 2% of Korean exports and 1 to 1.5% of Korean imports. And the big reason for that is that African GDP as a region is still very small.
Africa's global share of GDP is around 5%, while South Korea's accounts for 1.6%. This means that the GDP of the whole region equates to just 3 times that of South Korea. The low GDP combined with the geographical distance has made trade difficult, along with the political instability in certain areas that have made it a risky region to do business with. However, the International Monetary Fund has set optimistic forecasts for economic growth in the sub-Saharan region, predicting that this will rise from 3.4% last year to 3.8% this year after 4 turbulent years.
We have to remember that the African continent's share of population is about 18%. So they have a vast room to grow, and they are less developed, so they have a lot of demand for infrastructure investment. And in order to make infrastructure investment, they will have a lot of demand for financing.
South Korea and Africa also share a major issue affecting many regions around the world: global warming, which affects crops and other natural resources. Consumer prices in South Korea are skyrocketing with large price hikes for fresh produce, while the World Meteorological Organization reported that more than $8.5 billion worth of economic damages were wrought in Africa by climate-related hazards in 2022. With this shared interest in tackling global issues and untapped potential in trade and infrastructure investment yet to be explored, the summit, talks and business forum are expected to boost economic cooperation in the future. Moon Hae-ryun, Arirang News.
And aside from trade, tourism is also on the agenda of greater partnership between Korea and the nations of Africa. Our Yoon has more.
The 2024 Korea-Africa Tourism Forum has opened a new chapter in tourism diplomacy. Joining hands with the Korea Tourism Organization and the United Nations Tourism, South Korea's Culture Ministry hosted the forum participated in by the President of Mauritius and ministers from across Africa, including Nigeria and Namibia.
Seoul's Four Seasons Hotel was the host venue for the first ever high-level tourism diplomacy talks between Korea and Africa. The forum on Monday had the theme of forging strategic partnerships for sustainable tourism diplomacy.
The discussion's main focus was to delve into strategies for enhancing cultural exchanges and fostering investment cooperation within the tourism sector between Korea and Africa.
Africa is the world's youngest and most vibrant region. It stands with endless potential for collaboration with South Korea. Tourism is believed to be a vital bridgehead in fostering a mutually beneficial relationship between Korea and Africa for the future.
President Prediat Singh Gopan of Mauritius also shared his expectations for the forum, aiming to exchange ideas and best practices with South Korea.
For the African continent, the tourism industry constitutes a key sector contributing around 6% to its GDP. Korea, on the other hand, is a world leader in innovation in the tourism sector, and its attractiveness have become remarkable.
He added that Mauritius could learn from South Korea in terms of strategies and foster partnerships given that tourism offers from Mauritius are complementary. The CEO of Africa Tourism Partners, Kwakie Donko, proposed improving the trade of tourism products in the private sector as well as investments. But he did highlight the importance of enhancing connectivity through people, saying that when it comes to social and cultural exchange, there was no better opportunity.
Make sure that these Africans in Korea and then the Koreans in Africa become our ambassadors in both destinations to make sure.
The first step in unlocking the tourism potential between Korea and Africa is to encourage active participation among people to raise awareness. As part of this, after the forum, participants visited the photo exhibition, Invitation to Africa, at the National Museum of Korean Contemporary History. The exhibition aims to promote a positive image of Africa and foster growth in the continent's tourism sector by featuring 38 photographs that showcase tourist destinations from 27 African countries. It will be open to the public for free until June 7th. Lee Eun-hee, Arirang News.
The Cabinet here has passed a proposal calling for the suspension of all clauses under the September 19th Inter-Korean Military Agreement. In a meeting presided over by Prime Minister Han Duck-soo earlier on this Tuesday morning, members of the Cabinet stood in support of the motion drawn up by the Presidential National Security Council the day prior. The Cabinet's decision follows Pyongyang's recent floating of waste-carrying balloons into South Korea just ahead of the latter's inaugural summit with Africa. The National Security Council on Monday denounced North Korea's latest despicable actions and suggested suspending the cross-border military pact until, quote, mutual trust is restored. In other news, inflation here in Korea eased to a 10-month low last month on year, but remains above the central bank's target of 2%. Findings by Statistics Korea shared on this Tuesday show the country's consumer price index gained 2.7% in May on year. The latest index marks the slowest annual acceleration since July 2023, and it also compares to the 2.9% on-year rise in April. Fruit prices remain high, with apples and pears surging some 80% on year. According to Seoul's Finance Minister Choi Sang-mok, Korea's inflation will stabilize in the lower to mid 2% range in the latter half of this year, as tariff cuts on fruits as well as vegetables are extended, while the cap on public utility expenses is maintained. Now, as mentioned during our newscast on Monday, Korea may have struck not gold, but crude oil and natural gas off its east coast. Our Lee Si-hoo has details.
On Monday, President Yoon announced that he had approved South Korea's exploratory drilling for potentially vast oil and gas reserves in the East Sea off the southeastern coastal city of Pohang.
저는 오늘 산업통상자원부에 동해 심해 석유 가스전에 대한 탐사 시추 계획을 승인했습니다. 사전 준비 작업을 거쳐 금년 말에 첫 번째 시추공 작업에 들어가면 내년 상반기까지는 어느 정도 결과가 나올 것입니다.
President Yoon said at a briefing in his office, there's a high chance the area may contain as much as 14 billion barrels of oil and gas, according to studies by expert organizations, upon request from the South Korean government. He says the amount is judged to be 300 times the amount of resources discovered in an EC gas field in the late 1990s, and about the amount of natural gas that could fuel the country for more than 29 years. And the field could also contain enough petroleum to last the country for more than 4 years. Han Duck-eun, the Minister of Trade, Industry and Energy, said the drilling is expected to begin around December. Han suggested a rough timeline afterward if the drilling does confirm the presence of vast reserves.
If reserves are confirmed, We expect the commercialization process to begin around 2027 to 2028 and commercial production to begin in 2035.
An official at the ministry also explained the success rate of exploratory drilling is around 20%. The government and the Korea National Oil Corporation, along with investments from global companies, will cover the drilling costs. It's expected at least 5 boreholes will be drilled at the cost of over 100 billion Korean won, or around $75 million per drill. South Korea is one of the world's largest buyers of crude oil and gas, according to the Korea National Oil Corporation. The country's energy stocks jumped after the announcement. Lee Si-hu, Arirang News.
Also in the news, an annual forum between Korea and multilateral development banks to promote green strategies for sanitation and sustainability took place here in Seoul back on Monday. Our Lee Soo-jin files this report.
Aiding the overseas expansion of South Korea's environmental industry is what the Ministry of Environment and the Korea Environmental Industry and Technology Institute aim to achieve at the 3rd annual Korea-MDB Green Cooperation Forum.
Our world faces numerous environmental challenges, from long-standing issues to the pressing climate crisis. KT is hosting this forum to facilitate cooperation in the Korean government and multilateral development bankers in tackling these environmental issues.
The forum, which took place on Monday in Seoul, seeks to provide South Korean green tech companies with opportunities to network with MDBs. As international financial institutions that provide economic support for developing countries, MDBs have increased their climate project financing to more than $63 billion from 2016 to 2020.
There is an opportunity to collaborate with MDBs in different specific sectors: water and sanitation, water management activities, and also like the waste management.
And local companies can benefit from their participation in these projects in various ways.
For incentive, there are incentives in the sense that I think once the project is developed very well, it's a win-win issue. I think the market opportunities are there.
One local company that's participated in an MDB Green project is Yoon, an engineering and construction consulting company. In 2022, it carried out studies to modernize the existing wastewater treatment facility and sewage systems in Costa Rica to adapt them to climate change.
We consider partaking in MDB projects a very lucrative opportunity because it allows us to enter overseas markets.
And this year, it will participate in the Inter-American Development Bank's project to improve the infrastructure of sewage treatments in 8 cities in Belize.
With more opportunities like this to network, Korean firms will find it easier in the future to get involved in green projects by multilateral development banks. Lee Soo-jin, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, the government here is mulling over prospects of permitting hospitals to process the resignations of doctors in training who remain in protest against the planned expansion in medical school enrollment quota. Authorities are hoping this permission will offer hospitals with more leeway to engage directly with their junior doctors to better persuade them to return to their places of work. There is also speculation about government efforts to ease working hours and to provide financial assistance for future training to further encourage junior doctors to return to hospitals. Out of the over 13,000 doctors in training who walked out of their workplaces, some 8% have returned thus far. On the international front, prospects of a fresh peace initiative to end the violence in Gaza have been rendered uncertain as advocates and critics clash over details of the proposal. Our Shin Ha-young explains.
Facing strong opposition from far-right members of his coalition to a new Gaza ceasefire proposal, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said Monday that a plan announced by U.S. President Joe Biden on Friday was only a partial outline of Israel's proposal. President Biden said Israel had proposed a 3-phase plan that includes a partial and then complete release of hostages, as well as a phased withdrawal of Israeli troops. However, Netanyahu emphasized that the war would continue until Hamas is eliminated.
We are working in countless ways to return our hostages. We have gone the extra mile to bring them back. But during this action, we have maintained the goals of the war. and primarily the elimination of Hamas.
In response to Biden's announcement, Israel's Minister of Finance and the National Security Minister threatened to resign and topple Netanyahu's coalition government if he went ahead with the plan. The U.S. State Department countered increasing Israeli criticism of Biden's remarks by stating that the plan was ultimately an Israeli proposal.
It was an Israeli proposal. Obviously, it was a proposal that they developed in consultation with the United States and Qatar and Egypt, the three countries that have played the mediating role throughout this process, but this was ultimately an Israeli proposal.
According to the White House, during a phone call with Qatar's emir on Monday, Biden affirmed that Hamas is the only obstacle to a complete ceasefire and confirmed Israel's readiness to move forward with terms he set out last week. In a joint statement on Monday, G7 leaders said they stood behind the proposal and called on Hamas to accept it. On the same day, the South Korean government announced its full support for the peace proposal, urging all related parties to promptly accept and faithfully implement it. 신하영, Arirang News.
Mexico is looking to usher in its first female leader. Early ballot count show Claudia Sheinbaum at the forefront. Our Lee Seung-jae has more.
For the first time in the 200 years since Mexico became a republic, a female president is set to take office in the country. Preliminary data from the National Electoral Institute showed that Claudia Sheinbaum won between 58.3% to 60.7% of the vote to win the country's presidential election. The 61-year-old takes over her longtime political ally and mentor, Andrés Manuel López Obrador. She also becomes the first Jewish leader of Mexico, having been born to Lithuanian and Bulgarian Jewish parents. A climate scientist, Sheinbaum was also the mayor of Mexico City from 2018 to 2023. Many political pundits see her as continuing the work of Obrador, whose social welfare programs led to the success of the Morena party. The president-elect pledged to stick to her predecessor's policies, which include scholarships for more than 12 million students and pensions for all senior citizens. Sunday's election was also the largest in the country's history, with more than 98 million voters registered. She will begin her 6-year term on October 1st. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
China says its lunar probe Chang'e 6 has collected samples from the far side of the moon and is making its way back to Earth. According to the China National Space Administration earlier on Tuesday, Chang'e 6 endured high temperatures and obtained samples, including soil, from the surface and below the surface of the moon. Following the sample collection, the lunar probe also reportedly unfolded the Chinese national flag on the side of the moon that faces away from Earth. Chang'e 6 landed on the far side of the moon early Sunday morning. It's expected to return home around June 25th. And those are the headlines at this hour here in Korea. Coming up next is our daily panel session, so do stay with us.